The first snow of December fell softly over the quiet town of Ridgehaven when Daniel Pierce's world collapsed in a single morning. His job was gone, his savings drained by months of medical bills, and the house he once called a promise for his family now stood half empty after the divorce he never wanted. Christmas lights glowed on every street, but to him they looked like wounds, reminders of everything he had lost. That night, while carrying a box of old decorations to the curb, he slipped on the icy steps. The crash echoed through the neighborhood. A couple glanced his way, whispered something, and walked on. Shame burned deeper than the bruise on his shoulder. Daniel didn't know whether he was angrier at life, at himself, or at heaven. Yet as he sat on the cold ground, defeated, a single ornament rolled from the box, a small wooden star his late mother had carved for him when he was a boy. Inside was her handwriting, "Light finds you, even when you stop searching." Daniel stared at it, shivering. He didn't believe it anymore, but something about holding that fragile star in the dark felt like a question he wasn't ready to answer. A passing stranger paused, looked at him with quiet concern, and said only, "You all right, sir?" Daniel nodded, though he wasn't. He had no idea that this December, the season he least believed in, would become the very place where God began stitching his life back together, thread by thread, light by light. Everything had a purpose. Ridgehaven had always carried the kind of quiet charm travelers admired, but rarely stayed long enough to understand. Evergreen trees bordered the narrow streets, and the scent of pine lingered through the winter air. Children practiced carols outside the church steps, their voices soft under the golden glow of lanterns. Every window seemed to hold a piece of someone's hope, wreaths, candles, paper snowflakes cut by small hands. But Daniel walked through it all like a ghost, moving among the living. He rented a modest attic apartment above an old bakery run by Mrs. Whitfield, a woman with silver hair and a voice that sounded like warm bread straight out of the oven. She greeted him every morning, often offering a muffin by accident, as she liked to say, though everyone knew nothing she did was accidental. Daniel always thanked her politely but kept his distance. He had learned, slowly and painfully, that the fewer people who knew your heart, the fewer who could break it. His evenings were quiet, too quiet. The attic sloped downward on both sides, forcing him to stoop near the walls. The heater clicked more than it warmed. A single lamp sat on a crate, illuminating the one photograph he had not thrown away. Him, his ex-wife Clara, and their daughter Lily on a Christmas morning 3 years earlier. Lily, only 6 then, had been laughing so hard her eyes disappeared into crescent moons. Daniel touched the frame with careful fingers, tracing the outline of the family he no longer had. He worked part-time at Dawson's Hardware, a small store that had survived by being more heart than business. The owner, Mr. Dawson, pretended not to notice when Daniel asked for extra shifts. He simply said, "Clock in, son," and handed him a broom or a clipboard. Customers who recognized Daniel from better years sometimes offered sympathetic smiles, but sympathy had become another weight he didn't want to carry. At night, Ridgehaven lit up with holiday gatherings, choirs practicing, families shopping, neighbors exchanging cookies. Daniel watched from afar, always telling himself he was too tired, too busy, too behind on bills to join. The truth was simpler. Joy made him feel like an outsider. Still, there were small moments, fleeting, quiet, that softened the edges of his days. One afternoon, as he restocked shelves, a little boy tugged on his coat and handed him a candy cane. "Merry Christmas, mister." Daniel forced a smile. "Thank you." The boy skipped away, satisfied with the exchange. Daniel stared at the striped candy in his hand for a long moment before slipping it into his pocket. Even the wooden star from his mother, now kept on his nightstand, seemed to follow him. Sometimes he caught himself staring at it before bed. Other times he found himself whispering, "I'm trying, Mom," though he wasn't sure what trying even meant. He hadn't prayed in months. He felt unworthy of asking for anything, especially from God. One snowy evening, Mrs. Whitfield knocked gently on his door. "Daniel, dear, we're putting together small Christmas baskets for the families who need a little help this season. Would you like to join us?" He hesitated. I'm not sure I'd be much help." She smiled with quiet certainty. Helping has never required perfection. He didn't give her an answer that night. After she left, he sat alone, listening to the wind brush against the window. He felt something he couldn't name, an ache mixed with longing, a distant pull toward something he thought he had lost forever. Ridgehaven moved slowly around him, as if waiting for him to breathe again, to lift his head, to believe that even broken men still had chapters left to live. Christmas lights flickered outside, reflections dancing on the glass like little reminders that darkness never fully won. And though he didn't realize it yet, the town, with all its gentle noises and patient hearts, was becoming the first place in years where Daniel's soul could begin to thaw, one small mercy at a time. Everything had a purpose. The first real blow came on a Thursday morning so cold it felt like the air itself refused to move. Daniel arrived at Dawson's Hardware early, hoping the quiet would steady his thoughts. But the moment he stepped through the door, he sensed something was wrong. Mr. Dawson was standing behind the counter, hands folded, eyes filled with the kind of regret that made Daniel's stomach tighten. "Daniel," he began softly, "I've been trying to hold things together, but the store's been slowing down for months. I have to let someone go, and you're the newest hire." Daniel stared at him, numb. "I understand," he managed, though he barely did. It wasn't anger that washed over him. It was the familiar sting of being chosen last, of being let go first. Another loss, another door closed. He forced a smile that looked more like surrender. "Thank you for the chance, sir." Word spread through the small town faster than he expected. By midday, as he walked down Main Street with an empty box of his belongings, he could feel the looks, some sympathetic, some curious, some quietly judgmental. No one meant harm, but whispers travel quickly in a place where everyone knows your name. Two women outside the post office paused their conversation as he passed. Such a shame. He used to be doing so well. "I heard things got messy after the divorce." Daniel lowered his head. Their voices weren't cruel, just factual. But each word felt like another layer of failure added to his shoulders. Later that afternoon, he stopped by the cafe for a cup of cheap coffee. A man from church approached him, someone Daniel hadn't spoken to since his life fell apart. "Daniel, we've missed seeing you around. Everything all right?" "I'm managing," Daniel replied, hoping the conversation would end there. The man nodded slowly. "Sometimes God closes doors to teach us something." Daniel said nothing. He knew the man meant well, but the words felt like salt pressed into a wound still bleeding. He wasn't angry at God. He was simply convinced God had moved on without him. When he returned to the attic, the thin walls felt tighter than usual. The heater clicked in uneven rhythms, and for the first time, Daniel felt the full weight of how fragile his life had become. He sat on the floor with his back against the bed, staring at the wooden star on the nightstand. His mother used to say, storms revealed what anchors really held. He wondered if he had any anchors left. The next day, Mrs. Whitfield asked him gently, "How was work?" "I'm done at the hardware store," he answered quietly. Her eyes softened. "I'm truly sorry, dear." She didn't say more. She didn't offer advice or empty encouragement. She simply placed a warm loaf of bread on the counter and walked back to the kitchen. Her silence felt more comforting than all the words he had heard earlier, but the public judgment continued in small, unintentional ways. A customer at the bakery asked, "Aren't you the young man who lost his job again?" Another said, "Hard times for you, huh?" Daniel forced himself to nod politely each time, the shame pressing deeper. That night, snow fell heavier than before. Daniel stood by the attic window and watched the flakes descend like tiny, indifferent prayers. His reflection in the glass looked tired, older than the 34 years he carried. He whispered into the dim room, "What else do I have to lose?" He didn't expect an answer, but the silence that followed felt deeper than loneliness. It felt like the beginning of a breaking point he could no longer avoid. Everything had a purpose. The days after losing the job moved slowly, as if time itself hesitated around Daniel. The world outside glowed with Christmas color, yet inside the attic everything felt muted. One evening, unable to quiet the ache in his chest, he placed the wooden star in his hands and sat on the edge of his bed. The room held its breath. He whispered into the stillness, "Lord, if you're there, I don't know what you want from me anymore." It wasn't a polished prayer. It wasn't even confident. It was the cry of someone who had run out of explanations. He remembered his mother reading scripture to him by the fireplace when he was a boy, her voice gentle, saying, "God doesn't abandon the broken. He sits with them until they stand again." As a child, he believed it without question. As an adult, he couldn't understand why standing had become so difficult. The next morning, he walked through the quiet streets before sunrise. Snow crunched beneath his boots, and the cold stung his face. But something about the silence steadied him. Ridgehaven before dawn felt like a different world. No judgment, no curious eyes, just the sound of his breath and the faint hum of life waking slowly. He passed the church, its doors still closed. A lantern flickered near the steps, left by someone the night before. Daniel paused, drawn by a memory he had tried hard to bury. Christmas Eve services with Clara, Lily falling asleep in his arms, the warmth of belonging. It felt like another lifetime. Inside his thoughts, a question rose quietly. What if loss wasn't punishment? What if it was direction? He didn't have the courage to answer it, but he carried the question with him as he walked home. That afternoon, while helping Mrs. Whitfield shovel snow from the bakery entrance, she spoke softly, almost as if she were talking to herself. "Life has a way of stripping what we cling to, so we can learn what actually keeps us standing." Daniel glanced at her. She didn't explain further. She didn't need to. Her words settled inside him like a seed, small but alive. Later in the attic, he sat again with the wooden star. This time he didn't ask questions. He just breathed, letting the weight of the past few months rest where it fell. He felt no sudden miracle, no rush of clarity. But he did feel something shift, barely noticeable, a quiet willingness to believe that maybe, even here, even now, God wasn't finished writing his story. Everything had a purpose. As Daniel sat alone in the dim attic, the wooden star resting lightly in his palm, he felt the weight of his story pressing against the silence. The world outside kept moving, shining, celebrating, but somewhere inside him, a small ember of hope refused to die out. It flickered softly, like a candle shielded from the wind. If someone had looked at his life from the outside, they would have seen only the losses. Yet beneath the surface, something unseen was beginning to stir, quiet, patient, sacred. And to anyone listening to his journey now, his heart would offer a single truth. No one walks through seasons like this alone. Not truly. If this story is touching a familiar place in your soul, stay with it. Let the coming chapters remind you that even in the coldest winter, God is already preparing the warmth that will find you. Hold on. Daniel's turning point was closer than he knew. Everything had a purpose. The turning point arrived quietly, wrapped in an ordinary December morning. Daniel had gone to the bakery early, intending to thank Mrs. Whitfield for all her small kindnesses. He didn't have much to offer, only words, but words felt heavy these days, and he was learning to use them carefully. When he stepped inside, she was preparing trays of Christmas pastries for a community charity event. Flour dusted her apron like snow. "Daniel," she said, smiling, "would you mind helping me carry these boxes to the church hall? My old back isn't as cooperative as it once was." He hesitated, then nodded. Helping gave him something to do, something to hold on to. They walked through the crisp morning air, the church bells chiming gently in the distance. As they entered the hall, Daniel saw volunteers bustling around, arranging tables, sorting donations, wrapping small gifts for families in need. The atmosphere held a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. A young woman approached him, her arms full of winter coats. "Could you help me with these?" "Sure," Daniel said, taking part of the load. Her name was Emma Collins, a teacher who coordinated the community outreach every December. She worked with calm purpose, speaking to everyone with the same respect, from the mayor to the shy teenager folding blankets in the corner. As the morning unfolded, Daniel found himself drawn into the rhythm of the room. He taped packages, carried boxes, swept up stray bits of ribbon. No one asked about his past. No one whispered about his failures. Here, he wasn't the man who lost everything. He was simply Daniel, another pair of hands, another heart willing to help. During a break, Emma handed him a cup of hot cider. "Thank you for being here," she said. "It's nothing," he replied. "It's not nothing," she answered gently. "People show up for many reasons. But showing up when you're hurting, that's strength most folks never see." Her words settled in him like a warm blanket laid across cold shoulders. When the event ended, Emma approached him again. "We could use someone steady during the next few weeks. If you have time, we'd love your help." Daniel hesitated. I don't really have a job at the moment, so I suppose I'm free." "Then consider this an open invitation," she said with a grateful nod. As he walked home through the falling snow, Daniel felt something unfamiliar rising beneath his ribs. A quiet sense of being useful again. Not important, not admired, just useful. And for the first time in months, he realized how deeply he had missed that feeling. Back in the attic, he placed the wooden star on the windowsill where the afternoon light touched it. He whispered, almost without thinking, "Thank you." The words surprised him. They came from a place in his heart he thought had gone silent. The blessing wasn't grand. It didn't erase his losses, but it reopened a door he long believed was shut, the door of purpose. And though he couldn't see it yet, it was the first clear sign that God was leading him toward something greater than the life he had mourned. Everything had a purpose. The weeks that followed felt gentler, almost unfamiliar in their calm. Daniel helped at the church hall nearly every day, sorting food donations, fixing broken toys, repairing old shelves, anything that needed steady hands. Emma often worked beside him, offering small smiles that didn't demand anything from him. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt his breathing ease. But peace seldom comes without a test. One icy afternoon, as volunteers prepared care packages for struggling families, Emma approached him with a clipboard. "We're short on deliveries today. Could you drive a few boxes across town?" Daniel nodded. It was simple enough. He loaded the car with blankets, groceries, and small wrapped gifts. But halfway to the first address, the engine sputtered, coughed, and died at the side of Ridgehaven Road. Snow fell harder by the minute. Daniel stepped out, breath clouding in the frozen air, frustration rising quick and sharp. His car, the one thing he relied on, had chosen today to fail. He called the only mechanic he trusted, but the response was bleak. "Daniel, that engine's done. Tow truck's on the way. But fixing, it'll cost more than the car's worth." He stood there, numb once again. Another loss. Another reminder of how fragile everything in his life had become. When he returned to the church hall on foot, soaked through and exhausted, Some volunteers glanced at him with concern, others with quiet pity. He hated the pity most. Emma hurried over. "What happened?" "The car's gone," he said simply. Her eyes softened. "I'm so sorry. That's a hard hit." "It's fine," he murmured, though it wasn't. But the real trial came later that evening. Daniel's ex-wife, Clara, called unexpectedly. Her voice sounded strained. "Daniel, it's Lily." His heart stopped. "What about her?" "She's sick. Nothing dangerous, but she needs rest. I can't bring her for the Christmas visit this weekend." The blow hit deeper than he expected. Those visits were the few moments that made him feel like a father again. "I understand," he whispered. "I'm sorry," Clara said, guilt threading through her words. "She was so excited to see you." After the call ended, Daniel sat on the cold attic floor, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. It felt as if everything was slipping through his fingers again. Work, dignity, stability, fatherhood. A slow ache spread through his chest, the kind that came not from panic, but from accumulated disappointment. He tried to pray, but the words tangled. "Lord, I'm trying. I'm really trying. Why does it feel like every step forward pulls me 2 steps back?" No answer came, only the soft whir of the weak heater. That night, Emma knocked on his door with a small bag of groceries. "You didn't show up after the deliveries. I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I've had better days," he admitted. She placed the bag on the counter. "I won't pretend to understand what you're carrying, but please don't disappear, not now." Her voice held no judgment, only quiet sincerity. After she left, Daniel stared at the wooden star on the windowsill. Its faint reflection shimmered in the glass, surrounded by falling snow. He touched it gently, as if grounding himself. He didn't know it yet. But this second trial, the loss, the disappointment, the ache of missing his daughter, was shaping something inside him. Strength he didn't recognize, compassion he hadn't yet used, a deeper surrender that would lead him exactly where he needed to go. God was still writing. The page had simply turned. Everything had a purpose. Bosedisi, 2 days before Christmas, Ridgehaven prepared for its annual Winter Outreach Night, a gathering where the church opened its doors to anyone who needed warmth, food, or simply a place to rest. The hall glowed with lanterns and pine garlands, and snow outside fell in soft, steady sheets. Daniel arrived early, carrying a quiet heaviness after the difficult week, but determined not to retreat into himself. Inside, volunteers rushed about with purpose. Emma greeted him with a gentle smile. "I'm glad you're here. Tonight matters more than usual." He didn't know what she meant, but he rolled up his sleeves and joined in. Hours later, when the doors opened, people streamed in. Families with tired eyes, older men seeking shelter from the cold, single mothers clutching small children. Daniel helped serve soup, carried trays, passed out blankets. He moved quietly, but steadily, letting the rhythm of serving others settle his spirit. Near the back of the hall, a little girl sat alone at a table, hugging a worn, stuffed rabbit. Her mother spoke with a counselor nearby. Something about the girl drew Daniel's attention, the way she kept glancing at the doorway, as if waiting for someone who might never arrive. He approached slowly. "Is this seat taken?" She shook her head. "What's your name?" "Maggie," she whispered. She looked no older than Lily. Daniel sat beside her, keeping his voice soft. "Are you doing all right tonight?" She shrugged. "Mom says we have to stay here for a while. Our house is too cold." A quiet ache spread through him. Not pity, recognition, a shared fracture. When her mother returned, she thanked him. Her voice trembled with exhaustion, but gratitude shone through it. "We've been through a lot this year. This place, tonight, it's a blessing." As they spoke, one of the counselors approached Daniel. "She told me they've been trying to get help for weeks. No extended family, no support system." He paused. "You've been here every day, Daniel. Would you sit with families like this? Listen, guide them to resources. You have a way of making people feel safe." Daniel blinked. "Me?" "Yes," the counselor said. "People open up to those who understand pain. Your story gives you understanding most don't have." The words struck something deep, something he didn't know he'd been waiting to hear. All the losses, the setbacks, the humbling, the seasons of loneliness, they hadn't broken him. They had shaped him into someone who could see the invisible wounds in others. As the night went on, Daniel found himself moving from table to table, talking gently with families, offering simple kindness. No grand speeches, no promises he couldn't keep, just presence, steady, quiet, healing. When the hall began to empty, Emma walked beside him, her voice soft in the dim glow. "Do you see it now?" "See what?" "That all the breaking wasn't the end, it was preparation." Daniel looked around the hall, the blankets, the candles, the children resting in warm arms, and something within him finally aligned. He wasn't meant to rebuild his old life. He was meant to step into a new one. Purpose didn't arrive with trumpets. It arrived tonight, in a room full of people searching for the same hope he once believed he had lost. And for the first time in months, Daniel felt a steady warmth in his chest. Clear, quiet, undeniable. Everything had a purpose. Christmas morning arrived with a soft golden light spreading across Ridgehaven. The town felt unusually still, as if the world itself paused to breathe. Daniel woke before dawn, not because of sorrow or heaviness, but because something inside him had settled, quietly, deeply. He stepped outside the bakery, the cold air brushing his face. For the first time in a long while, he didn't dread the day. He walked to the church hall, where volunteers were gathering leftovers from the previous night to deliver to families who couldn't attend. When he entered, a few people waved, smiling with a warmth that felt genuine, not sympathetic. He was no longer the man trying to hold his life together. He was part of something that mattered. Emma approached him, carrying a stack of lists. "We could use you on the visitation team today," she said. "You have a way of speaking to people that makes them feel seen." Daniel nodded, humbled. "I'd be honored." Their first stop was a small apartment where Maggie and her mother were staying temporarily. Maggie's eyes lit up when she saw him. "You came back," she said softly. "I said I would," Daniel replied. They brought blankets, food, and small gifts donated by the community. But more than the items, it was the presence, the simple act of showing up that brought tears to the mother's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As Daniel left the building, he felt it again, that quiet pull, that sense of alignment, the ache of losing his job, his car, his marriage, and even the chance to see Lily this Christmas. None of it vanished, but it no longer defined him. Instead, he saw how those wounds had carved space in him for compassion he never would have understood otherwise. Later that afternoon, Clara called again. Her tone was softer this time. "Lily's feeling better," she said. "She wants to talk to you." When his daughter's voice filled the line, small, bright, excited, Daniel closed his eyes against the sting of tears. "Merry Christmas, Daddy. Merry Christmas, sweetheart." They talked about her drawings, her school play, the snowman she planned to build once she was fully well. When the call ended, Daniel felt no bitterness, only gratitude for the sound of her joy. As evening approached, he returned to the church hall to help clean. Lanterns glowed softly against the wooden beams. The room looked humble, but to him it felt holy, a place where his heart had slowly come back to life. Emma joined him as he stacked chairs. "You seem lighter," she said. "I think I finally understand," Daniel replied. Everything that fell apart, it was making room. Redemption hadn't arrived in a single miracle. It had come gently through service, through compassion, through being needed again, through realizing he was never abandoned, only redirected. And for the first time in many months, Daniel allowed himself to hope freely, without fear of losing that hope. Everything had a purpose. A year later, Ridgehaven's church bell rang once more for the annual winter outreach night. Snow fell thick and slow, blanketing the town in silence. Inside the warm hall, laughter echoed between tables where families shared hot soup and stories. Children hung paper stars on the tall pine tree by the window, each one carrying a handwritten prayer. At the front of the room, Daniel stood beside Emma, now co-directors of the town's new community program, the Haven Project. What had begun as a single night of service had grown into a year-round effort, providing meals, mentoring, and shelter repairs for struggling families. The work was modest, but real, and Daniel knew in his heart it was sacred. He looked around the room, seeing faces that had once mirrored his own pain. People he had helped now served alongside him. Brokenness had turned into belonging. At one table sat Maggie and her mother, smiling, stronger than before. Maggie waved when she caught his eye. "You kept your promise," she said when he approached. He smiled gently, and so did God. Later that evening, when the event ended and volunteers began cleaning up, Daniel lingered near the window. Outside, the snow glistened beneath the lamplight, each flake catching the glow like a whisper of grace. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the old wooden star. The carved words, "Light finds you, even when you stop searching," were worn smooth, but still legible. He hung it quietly on the tree, among the prayers and handmade ornaments. For a long moment, he stood there, remembering the man he had been that first cold December, the one sitting alone, convinced his story had ended. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and whispered, "Thank you." Behind him, the church choir began softly singing "Silent Night." The melody wrapped around him like a promise fulfilled. Peace settled deep in his chest, not loud or dramatic, but steady and real. Daniel no longer searched for light. He had learned to live inside it. Everything had a purpose. There will be seasons when everything seems to fall apart at once, when losses feel unfair and the road ahead looks painfully uncertain. But in ways we seldom see at the time, God uses every broken piece to shape a greater purpose. What feels like the end often becomes the beginning of a gentler, wiser, humbler life, one built on compassion, not fear, on service, not shame, on faith, not despair. Daniel's story reminds us that healing rarely arrives in sudden miracles. It grows quietly through small acts of kindness, through choosing to show up, through letting God guide us even when we can't see the next step. No winter lasts forever. Light always finds its way back. Everything had a purpose. As Daniel's journey closes, let it remind you that no matter how cold or silent your season may feel, God is shaping something beautiful beneath the surface. If this story touched your heart, stay with us. More journeys like this are coming, stories of hope, healing, and grace that speak to the soul. If you haven't yet, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next reflection. Like this video to help it reach someone who may need this message today, and share with us in the comments, from which city and country are you watching? Your presence here matters more than you know. May light find you exactly where you are. Everything had a purpose.